In 1981, Harvard Medical School cardiologist Herbert Benson traveled to the Himalayas with a set of medical instruments and one question. Was it true that Tibetan monks could change their body temperature through sheer willpower? The Dalai Lama personally blessed the study and helped locate monasteries practicing the most advanced forms of meditation. What Benson saw and measured over the next 10 years revolutionized his understanding of the human body's capabilities and remains a subject of debate. In an unheated room at 4 degrees Celsius, monks in thin cotton robes sat in the lotus position, while assistants wrapped them in wet, ice-cold sheets. For an ordinary person, this would be a surefire way to hypothermia and death. But within minutes, steam began to rise from the sheets. Within an hour, the sheets were completely dry. The monks asked for more. Tibet is more than just a geographical location. It is an entire universe, built of stone, ice, prayer, and thousands of years of survival experience on the roof of the world. The average altitude of the Tibetan Plateau is 4,500 meters, higher than the summit of Mont Blanc, Europe's highest mountain. The air here contains 40% less oxygen than at sea level, and an unaccustomed person begins to suffocate just climbing stairs. Winter temperatures drop to -40 degrees. Ultraviolet light at this altitude burns the skin in minutes, and the nearest forest is often hundreds of kilometers away. The plateau lies above the tree line. In such conditions, people don't just survive, they've lived here for millennia and created one of the most profound and enigmatic cultures on the planet. Today, we will discuss 7 phenomena of the Tibetan tradition, commonly referred to as mysteries or secrets hidden from the world. The truth, as always, is more complex. Some of these mysteries are truly secret within the tradition, while others are open to anyone interested, but sound so incredible that they are often mistaken for hoaxes, and others are simply incomprehensible without context, which is impossible to convey in a 10-minute video. But we'll try. Secret 1. Tummo, inner fire. We started with it, and now we'll explore it in more detail. Tummo, fierce woman in Tibetan, is a meditation technique that is part of the 6 yogas of Naropa, a set of advanced tantric practices in Tibetan Buddhism. Its essence is as follows. The practitioner visualizes a flame in the navel area, combining this with a special breathing technique called Vas breathing, a deep inhalation, holding it in and contracting the abdominal muscles. The heat from the imaginary fire rises along the body's central energy channel, warming everything in its path. It sounds like pure mysticism, but Benson's data, published in the Harvard Journal, showed that monks actually did increase the temperature of their fingers and toes by 9.5 degrees Celsius. In 2013, neurobiologist Maria Kozhevnikova conducted a study in remote monasteries in eastern Tibet at an altitude of over 4,200 meters. She recorded an increase in the core body temperature of experienced meditators to 38.3 degrees Celsius, a low-grade fever achieved without infection, without physical exercise, and solely by the power of consciousness. EEG showed a simultaneous increase in alpha, beta, and gamma waves, a pattern that is inconsistent with sleep, wakefulness, or conventional meditation. Western participants in the control group, who were taught only a breathing technique without visualization, also experienced a slight increase in temperature, but significantly less than the experienced Tibetan monks. Science partially explains the phenomenon. Vase breathing creates increased abdominal pressure, which stimulates heat production through thermogenesis of brown fat, a specialized fatty tissue present in all humans but typically underactive in adults. Kozhevnikova found that brown fat activation was significantly greater in Tibetan monks than in Western control participants, possibly because years of practice had trained this tissue, much like an athlete trains muscles. But this isn't enough to explain all the observed effects. The neurocognitive component, the visualization of fire, plays a crucial role, and its mechanism is not fully understood. Somehow, a vivid mental image of a flame triggers a cascade of signals in the brain that cause the body to generate heat as if the fire were real. This isn't a placebo effect in the traditional sense. It's something much deeper, at the intersection of neurobiology, physiology, and consciousness. Monks don't lie. Instruments don't lie. But how exactly the imagination of fire turns into actual heat is a question science still has no complete answer to. And that's perhaps the most honest thing that can be said about Tummo. It's real, it's measurable, and it's not fully explained. Secret 2. Sky burial. This is that part of Tibetan culture that makes Westerners shudder, but which is as natural to Tibetans as a cemetery with tombstones is to us. When a Tibetan dies, their body is washed, wrapped in white cloth, and monks recite prayers next to the deceased for 3 to 5 days, guiding the soul toward rebirth. The body is then taken to a special stone platform in the mountains, often far from any human habitation, at a height where the wind blows constantly. There, a special master, a Rogyapa, dissects the body with a knife, separating the flesh from the bones. The bones are crushed with hammers and mixed with barley flour, tsampa, and yak butter. All this is offered to vultures, which circle above the platform, attracted by the smoke of juniper incense. To the Western mind, this sounds like a nightmare. To a Tibetan, it's an act of generosity. The body after death is an empty vessel from which the soul has departed. Giving it over to the vultures is a final act of mercy, feeding living beings with what you no longer need. Buddhism teaches that attachment to the physical body hinders the soul's progress, and sky burial is the literal embodiment of detachment. If the vultures consume the entire body, it's a good sign. The soul has departed in a pure state. If any remains, it's a bad omen, meaning the deceased had unrepentant sins and even the vultures refused to touch them. Western travelers who were fortunate enough to witness a sky burial invariably noted one detail that struck them most. The Rogyapas worked joyfully. They talked, joked, and laughed, as they would during any other physical labor. To a European, this seemed sacrilegious, but in the Buddhist tradition, this is precisely how it should be. A light, casual attitude toward the dead body helps the soul detach from the physical shell and move on. Fear, tears, and solemnity, on the contrary, bind the soul to the earthly and hinder rebirth. Sky burial is not a tragedy. It is the logistics of compassion. It's worth noting that sky burial isn't the only funeral rite in Tibet. Dalai Lamas and High Lamas are embalmed and placed in stupas, gilded reliquaries. Aristocrats and wealthy monks are cremated. Epidemic victims are immersed in the river. This is why Tibetans traditionally abstain from fish. Sky burial, however, is reserved for ordinary people and accounts for the vast majority of all funerals in Tibet. But there's also a completely prosaic reason for the rite's popularity. The Tibetan plateau is permafrost and bare rock. Digging a grave is impossible. A shovel won't penetrate the frozen ground. There are no trees for cremation. The plateau lies above the tree line. Sky burial is the only way to dispose of a body without harming the environment or wasting resources that are already scarce. Practicality and spirituality go hand in hand here, and this is perhaps the most Tibetan trait of all. The third secret. The Bardo Thodol is a book for the dead. Westerners know it as the Tibetan Book of the Dead, though this name was coined not by Tibetans but by the British. The real title is Bardo Thodol, which means Liberation Through Hearing in the Intermediate State. This is not a book about death as we understand it. It is a practical guide that a monk reads aloud over the body of the deceased for 49 days, the 7 weeks that, according to Tibetan tradition, the soul spends in the intermediate state between death and rebirth. The text describes 8 stages of dying, which the consciousness passes through one after another. From the dissolution of the body's elements, earth dissolves into water, water into fire, fire into wind, wind into space, to the encounter with the blinding light of the clear mind, which is, in essence, the moment of potential enlightenment. If the dying person recognizes this light and is not frightened, they achieve liberation and escape the cycle of rebirth forever. If they are frightened or do not recognize it, they fall further through a series of visions that become increasingly frightening. Peaceful deities give way to wrathful ones. Space is filled with fire, thunder, and the cries of demons. The text insists, all of these are projections of one's own consciousness, not reality. Demons are your fears. Fire is your anger. There is nothing external, only internal. The task of the monk reading the text at the body is to help the soul not lose its bearings in this kaleidoscope, reminding it again and again, do not be afraid. What you see is yourself. Recognize the light and go towards it. For an atheist, this is, of course, poetry, not a manual. But here's what's interesting. The description of the stages of dying in Bardo Thodol strikingly echoes what people report having had clinical death experiences. A bright light, a tunnel, encounters with figures, a feeling of peace, followed by fear. Neuroscientists explain this by oxygen deprivation of the brain, the release of endorphins, and chaotic electrical activity in the visual cortex. Tibetans mapped this experience centuries before the invention of the EEG, using the only tool available to them: systematic meditation on one's own death. When the Tibetan Book of the Dead was first translated into English in 1927 by the American Walter Evans Wentz, it caused a sensation in Western intellectual circles. Carl Jung wrote a preface. Aldous Huxley cited it in his works on the expansion of consciousness. In the 1960s, Timothy Leary adapted the framework of the Bardo Thodol to describe the psychedelic experience, creating The Psychedelic Experience, a manual based on the Tibetan Book of the Dead. A text written to guide the dying became a guide for the living, seeking altered states of consciousness. Tibetan monks, upon learning of this, reacted with characteristic calm. This isn't exactly what the text was written for, but if it helps people, so be it. Secret 4. The Rainbow Body. This is perhaps the most incredible claim of the Tibetan tradition, and the only one that science can neither confirm nor deny, because by definition, it is impossible to verify. According to the Zogchen tradition, one of the highest practices of Tibetan Buddhism, a fully enlightened master dissolves their physical body into rainbow light at the moment of death. The body shrinks over several days until nothing remains, or only nails and hair. Witnesses describe a rainbow glow around the body, the smell of sourceless incense, and strange sounds. Tibetan literature has recorded over 160 cases of rainbow bodies over the past millennium. Skeptics, of course, view these accounts with understandable distrust. Not a single case has been documented by photography or video, although in 1998, the Tibetan monk Khenpo Achu died in Sichuan province, and witnesses claimed his body shrank over the course of 7 days. Several dozen people reportedly saw a rainbow glow. However, no independent scientific verification has been conducted, and all accounts are oral, passed down through a chain of retellings. The bodies that disappeared could have been secretly cremated or buried by students wishing to create a cult around their teacher. The smell of incense could be due to monks actually burning incense near the body, a standard part of the ritual. The rainbow glow could be an optical illusion, a trick of the mountain light, or a collective suggestion within a group of people deeply believing in the possibility of such an event. But here's the interesting thing. Even if the rainbow body is a legend, its function within the tradition is absolutely real and measurable. It serves as a motivator. It tells the practitioner, if you meditate with full dedication throughout your life, something so grandiose awaits you that even your body will cease to be material. This is a powerful psychological incentive, and it works regardless of whether someone's body has actually dissolved into rainbow light. Secret 5. Tertons and Hidden Texts. This secret is the real one, and it concerns how Tibetan Buddhism is structured internally. In the 8th century, the Indian master Padmasambhava, revered by Tibetans as the second Buddha, brought Buddhism to Tibet. According to tradition, he understood that not all of his teachings would be understood by his contemporaries, and so he hid some texts, terma, in rocks, lakes, temples, and even in the streams of consciousness of certain people. These hidden teachings were meant to be discovered at the right time by the right person, a terton, or treasure revealer. Over the centuries, dozens of tertons discovered Padmasambhava's texts, sometimes physically, a scroll in a cave, sometimes through visions and meditation. A skeptic might say, a convenient scheme for legitimizing any new text. Declare yourself a terton, discover a text that, by pure coincidence, answers the pressing questions of your time, and your authority is assured. And yes, there have been abuses. Some tertons were exposed as frauds during their lifetime. But the terma phenomenon is interesting for another reason. It allowed Tibetan Buddhism to evolve without abandoning the authority of its founder. Each new teaching is supposedly an old teaching rediscovered. Tradition remains unchanged, but the content is updated. This is an ingenious mechanism of cultural adaptation, unparalleled in world religions. Islam solves the problem of renewal through ijtihad, legal interpretation. Christianity, through councils and papal encyclicals. Tibetan Buddhism, through mystics who discover thousand-year-old texts in caves. The methods vary, but the function is the same: to adapt the teaching to new circumstances without destroying its foundation. Mystery 6. Shangri-La, a lost valley that doesn't exist. Or does it? Perhaps no Tibetan myth has had such an impact on Western culture as the legend of Shangri-La, a hidden valley of eternal youth and wisdom tucked away somewhere in the Himalayas. However, this legend wasn't invented by Tibetans. It was created by the English writer James Hilton in his 1933 novel Lost Horizon. Hilton was inspired by real accounts of travelers who had visited Tibet, and likely by the Tibetan concept of Bayul, hidden valleys that only open to the spiritually prepared. But Shangri-La as a specific place is a literary invention. This didn't stop dozens of expeditions from searching for Shangri-La in the Himalayas. The Nazis sent an expedition to Tibet in 1938 to 1939, the Schaefer Expedition, inspired in part by theories of lost Aryan civilizations. Soviet intelligence agencies were also interested in Tibet. Nicholas Roerich and Yakov Blumkin, according to various sources, sought mystical knowledge in the Himalayas for the Bolshevik project of a new man. This didn't stop the Chinese government in 2001 from renaming Zhongdian County in Yunnan Province Shangri-La, solely to attract tourists. The renaming worked. Tourism increased tenfold, and this didn't stop millions of people from believing that somewhere in the unexplored valleys of Tibet live sages who possess the secrets of immortality. The Tibetan concept of Bayul, hidden valleys, is real and has its own history. Padmasambhava, the same 8th century master, supposedly sealed certain valleys in the Himalayas, making them accessible only to those spiritually prepared. These are inaccessible mountain valleys, which, according to tradition, can only be entered through certain passes at certain times with a certain state of mind. Some Bayuls were actually discovered by Teutons and became places of pilgrimage and retreat. The Pemako Valley on the border of Tibet and India is one of the most famous examples. Inaccessible, covered in jungle, with cascading waterfalls on the Sangpo River, it was considered a hidden paradise for centuries and was only fully explored by Western travelers in the 1990s. But it doesn't hide the immortal sages. It hides silence, isolation, and the opportunity to practice meditation away from the world. For a monk, this is immortality, not of the body, but of the spirit. Secret 7. Slowing metabolism. Meditation on the brink of death. Let's return to science, because Tibet's final secret is perhaps the most astonishing of all, and it's documented as thoroughly as Tummo. During his expeditions, Benson discovered that advanced Tibetan meditators were capable of not only warming up the body, but also radically slowing metabolism. One monk, during deep stabilization meditation, reduced his oxygen consumption by 64% relative to resting levels. For context, during normal sleep, metabolism drops by 10 to 15%. During simple meditation, it drops by 17. 64% is beyond anything ever recorded in humans. Researchers initially thought the equipment was malfunctioning. They checked, everything worked. The monk was simply breathing 6 to 7 times a minute instead of the usual 15, and his body entered a state for which science has no good name. Not sleep, not a coma, not hibernation. Something in between, controllable and reversible. In 1985, Benson's team filmed monks spending a winter night on a rock ledge at an altitude of 15,500 feet. The temperature dropped to minus 18 degrees Celsius. The monks wore only thin wool or cotton shawls, no sleeping bags, blankets, or insulated clothing. They lay down on the bare rocks and fell asleep. They didn't huddle together for warmth. The video shows no sign of shivering, and shivering is an automatic response to cold that's impossible to consciously suppress. Or rather, it was thought impossible, until this experiment. In the morning, they rose and calmly walked back to the monastery, as if they'd spent the night in a warm bed. Benson later admitted that watching them, he experienced something between scientific elation and existential shock. I realized we don't know even a fraction of what the human body is capable of. Benson believed that understanding these practices could revolutionize the treatment of stress disorders, pain management, and even hypothermic surgery. He dreamed that self-help would stand alongside drugs, surgery, and other therapies used to alleviate human suffering. This dream has not yet come true, but research continues. Today, it is conducted in laboratories from Singapore to Boston. Wim Hof, a Dutchman known as the Iceman, popularized a simplified version of breathing techniques based in part on the principles of Tummo, and his method has attracted the attention of millions of people and several serious scientific groups. But between a 10-minute breathing exercise according to Hof's method and 30 years of monastic practice is a gulf that cannot be bridged by enthusiasm or by signing up for an online course. And each new measurement confirms that Tibetan monks do not deceive, do not conjure, and do not exaggerate. They do things to the human body that Western medicine considered impossible, and they have been doing it for 1,000 years. The 7 Secrets of Tibet. Monks who dry wet sheets with their own body heat. A funeral rite in which the body is fed to vultures as a final act of mercy. A book read aloud to the dead for 49 days. A legend of a body dissolving in rainbow light. Hidden texts embedded in stones 1,000 years ago and revealed at the right moment. A lost valley, invented by an English novelist but still sought after, and a man who reduced his metabolism by 64% through sheer willpower. The monks don't hide anything from the world. The Dalai Lama personally invited a Harvard scientist to measure their work. He regularly participates in the Mind and Life conferences, where Buddhist masters meet with neuroscientists and share experiences. Tibetan monks aren't afraid of science. They embrace it. The Dalai Lama once said, "If science proves any Buddhist teaching to be wrong, Buddhism must change." They fear only one thing, that practices that require decades of preparation will be taken out of context and turned into 10-minute online courses, after which someone will freeze to death trying to replicate what a monk does after 30 years of training. Or worse, that someone will decide that a podcast can replace the 49-day Bardo Thodol recitation. And that's perhaps the only real secret they keep. Not how, but when you're ready. Tell us in the comments which of these 7 mysteries struck you the most. Wet sheets drying on the bodies of meditating monks, a book read to the dead, a metabolism slowed by 64%, or a valley invented by an Englishman but sought by millions. Subscribe to the channel because there are still many stories worth telling on the roof of the world. See you there.